In the first video, we talked about installing and configuring Tintri Global Center 5.1 and above. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Settings tab and the Hardware tab to get you familiarized with managing the Tintri VM stores via the TGC instance and not a VM store UI on the box itself. So this is the Tintri UI, similar to the last video. This is the dashboard tab that you're used to seeing if you've seen a VM store UI. This is now present in Tintri Global Center. What's different now is there's a settings tab that shows you all of the settings that are available normally only through the VM store UI. They've now been added into an HTML5 format and embedded into Tintri Global Center. So as you can see here, you can do alerts, you can set up logging, you can put the box in maintenance mode so it suppresses alerts in case you're doing some sort of network maintenance. I highly recommend that you turn that on during those events, but you also remember to turn it off. It's actually better to leave it off than it is to turn it on and leave it on. So be careful using that particular mode. You also have the ability to make sure that auto supports get sent. There is a link on here that goes directly to the auto support page on the VM store UI, what we call the Essentials UI. That is, this section of the UI is not Flash. So if you needed to retrieve logs from your device, you can do that via that direct link. You will have to log into the VM store UI in order to get there, but it is HTML5 only. You can change the data IPs on the system, just like you could on the VM store UI. You can set up Hypervisor Managers here. We support 5 different ones: vCenter, Hyper-V, RevM, OpenStack, and XenServer. In this particular lab setup, I do not have Active Directory, so Hyper-V would not be an option. You can turn on LACP for the admin network, the data network, the replication network. You can set up NFS access restrictions on here. You can also set up a default snapshot schedule for VMs that are on that VM store. You can set up replication paths just like you could before. And then also you can set up the default space savings behavior. I highly recommend you turn this button on, because what that will do is that will ignore whatever provisioning suggestion comes from vSphere or another hypervisor in terms of thick provisioning VMs, either via NFS for most hypervisors or over SMB3 for Hyper-V. There's no concept of thick provisioning on a network share, so we highly recommend you turn this on whenever possible. Another tab that's available in TGC is the Hardware tab. So over here on the right, this will bring up a diagram of the hardware itself. In this case, this is a T885, and you can see there that it shows you where the SSD slots are, where the normal hard drive slots are, the controllers, which ports are plugged in. Gives you the ability to fail it over if that's required. And also check the data network for either controller A or controller B to find out what the IP addresses are, whether the ports are up, what speed they're coming up at, etc. You also have the ability to go to the Diagnose tab, just like you did on the original VM store UI, where you can create support bundles directly from here. So if support asks you to create what's called an interactive bundle, you would click this button right here. You also have links here for those logs and those bundles on that VM store itself. Again, it takes you to what we call the Essentials UI. So that is not a Flash enabled section of the UI to get just a directory listing of whatever files you need to look at. Also on here is an online help function. So built into the device is an online help system that shows you a full online help manual, if you will, for most, if not all, functions that are available on the device. So if you're stuck and don't have the ability to download the admin guide or don't have a PDF reader or whatever it may be, all of that is here. A search function enabled, so it's a fully functional online help system. So on the VM store itself, one of the things that I mentioned a little while ago is the protection. So we're going to be talking a little bit about service groups in the next segment. But one of the things that you can do here is set the default policy for protection for each individual VM on that VM store. You can also go in here and take a look at the managed objects on that particular VM store. I have 2 VMs on here. And then using this tab, I can go in and change the settings for that individual VM. So as you see here, this particular VM uses the defaults for that particular VM store. We'll be talking about service groups in the next video, but this shows you that it's using the default on that system, which, as you see here, are no snapshots being taken at any of these intervals. There's also no replication configured and no either to a new VM store or the second VM store or to cloud using our cloud connector. So in here, I can edit this and say, I want to not use the defaults, and I'm going to take an hourly snapshot at 5 minutes past the hour. If I want to customize that, I can say I only want to keep 1 hour of snapshots around. If I wanted to keep a different policy on a remote site, I can do that, and I can also say what days of the week, how many minutes after the hour is appropriate. So now that I've changed those settings, you'll see that it says using custom settings. So I'm no longer using the default for that particular VM store. I'm now using a specific schedule for this individual VM, and this is where you can change it within the Tintri Global Center UI. So in our next video, we'll talk a little bit more about service groups. Now, if we go back to the Managed Objects tab, you'll notice here that I have the ability to bring up metrics for an individual VM as well. So this is something that you would normally do if you're not used to using TGC. You would do this from the VM Store UI. There's a number of metrics you can take a look at. So you can say IOPS, you can pick latency, you can put them side by side, just like we do here. But you notice here it says cluster view. This is the default view for an individual VM's metrics. And these are the metrics that we're pulling from the host itself. But what's much more interesting in most cases is the ability to pull data from the VM store. So we're going to go down to this VM store here, and now we're going to select these two metrics, but I'm going to change the IOPS to be what's called normalized IOPS. And the difference between the two is that what we do with an IOP is because we can see every data every piece of data that's coming in and what size those IOPS are, we can then normalize them to an 8K size, because not every IOP is the same. Some applications like data warehouse access data in bulk, in large pieces, versus some other applications like online databases, they may be accessing that data in very small chunks. So IOPS don't necessarily mean the same thing for all applications. So normalized IOPS will give you a way to compare applications to each other, normalized to an 8K IOPS size. And if I stay on this screen, what you'll see here is the real-time bar will show up. And what that means is now, instead of gathering data on a minute-by-minute basis, now I'm gathering data on a 10-second basis. So we're making more calls using the appropriate APIs, both to vSphere or the hypervisor you're using, it's vSphere in this case, and the VM store itself, to give you a real-time view as far as any metric that you like. So you can look in here and say, how am I comparing myself to an hour ago, 4 hours ago, 8 hours ago? And you can use this slider to change that scale if you choose. 1 day also. But that real time is still here. So now you can see, well, this was busy at some point in the afternoon, but it's not so busy right now. So this is great for troubleshooting things in a real-time way. And there are many other metrics that you can bring in here, such as, for example, CPU and memory. So this gives you the ability to see if, for example, that virtual machine might be swapping. So there's a number of different metrics you can bring up here. So it's very, very useful to be able to see all these in real time and stack them one on top of another to give you a better time to resolution for a particular issue you may be seeing. So in the next video, we're going to cover service groups and how to better manage snapshot schedules instead of using individual schedules or a VM store wide schedule. We can do much more customization in terms of managing those protection groups and actually do things like import new VMs into those schedules in real time.